All right, we're going to some weird places today, my friends. We're going to some very strange places. So strange that I feel the need to preface this video with a brief comment stating that I am a relatively intelligent person and I am a generally rational and logical person. I have not built bunkers preparing for what I'm about to discuss, nor have I changed my life plans preparing for this. It's an interesting thought experiment, an interesting imagination roller coaster to go on. Regarding Hellier, Secret Cipher of the Euphenots, and Extraordinary the Revelations. Let's begin the trip. So, Hellier series. Oh, and let me also say, I don't think this will probably make very much sense to anybody who hasn't seen Hellier and or read the complete Secret Cipher. I think just seeing Hellier will be enough. So I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to recap the whole series, number one, because the series is too complicated to really go into without just confusing things more. I think the only way to really cover it would be to cover it in so much depth that I would get into the area of poaching Planet Weird's content, which I don't want to do. So let me say, for those people who haven't seen Hellier but are fans of the weird, the strange, paranormal, the occult, all of these things, it was a documentary put out by the folks at Planet Weird. It was put out in 2019, and that timing is important to what I'm going to discuss soon. It basically went viral, and it has launched Planet Viral into a new level of notoriety and success, which is awesome because they all seem like great people, and I hope they all have tremendous success in life. I really dig them. Everyone in that series just strikes me as a good person. And also very serious about their work, which I appreciate. But so, the Hellier series, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to pin it in the description box, and I highly recommend you go see it. But if you have seen it, then that's what we're here to discuss. So, Hellier comes out 2019. What happened in 2020? I'll give you one guess, right? A little thing called the pandemic. And so, all right, if you're here watching this, if you're a Hellier fan, then you're probably aware that there's different ways of looking at this whole thing, right? And by this whole thing, I mean the 2020 pandemic, right? There are those who believe that those are more on the materialist side, or I mean, you could be on any side, maybe just a little more plugged into the corporate, not criminal, just the mainstream way of looking at things. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to, I'm not being disparaging. I'm saying there's a spectrum of ways to look at this, right? There are people who, to me, tend to be more on the materialist side, scientific materialist side, who just look at it as, hey, a virus got out of the lab, got out, boom, we have to deal with it. And we're eventually going to deal with it, and everything's going to go back to normal. And then you have people in the middle, maybe, more conspiratorial minded, and look at it as, the virus is real, but it was either engineered intentionally or was created. It doesn't matter the origins of it. The point is, it's being used to usher in an authoritarian, totalitarian nightmare dystopia, basically. And then you have the folks who are on the idealist side. And by idealist, I mean in the philosophical sense. Philosophical idealist, meaning the people who view the entire universe as being alive. And that everything within the universe has a certain kind of consciousness, right? That we live in a sea of consciousness, and that matter is actually an illusion, and that what is true is this fundamental underlying sea of consciousness that is happening at all times, right? It's kind of this like Gnostic worldview, which has taken so many shapes nowadays, which is really fun to watch, because now you have people with simulation theory. Even if people who are into simulation theory haven't heard of Gnosticism, it's like, yeah, dude, you're basically a Gnostic, But anyway, I don't want to get too into the weeds on that. You have this spectrum of people looking at things. And I think for most people, except for those who are really firmly on the side of the mainstream narrative is simply it. This virus got out, we need to deal with it, and once we deal with it, everything's going back to normal. I think most people, but especially the people on the idealist side, perceive it as, in 2020, human consciousness in the actual fabric of reality was changed forever, and we're never going back, for better or worse. And I think there will be good. I think the people in this camp view it as there will be good and there will be bad, but either way, we are charting a course for a new reality, a new consciousness that nobody can really understand or predict. and we ain't never going back. That the pandemic was just one symptom of the broader transformation that we underwent, right? And so if you're looking at it from that more idealist perspective, I think what I'm about to say will make more sense. But I guess I'll let you be the judge of that. So another thing that started happening in 2020, which kind of got subsumed by everything going on with the pandemic, was that the government was starting its supposed disclosure. And I say supposed disclosure because a lot of people in the UFO community believe that it was just a big psyop. It's a big lie. It's big propaganda. And then you have those blue book folks who believe that the end game is and has always been to launch a fake alien invasion as a pretense to usher in this authoritarian world net, basically. That's not actually not really my cup of tea. So I'm not sure if those people generally believe that aliens are real and are being used, or if those people believe that their aliens are complete BS, totally made up, and that blue beam is just based on something that doesn't actually exist at all. I'm not really sure. But either way, my point is we have the alien, whatever it means, alien disclosure coming. But for this thought experiment, let's assume, that seemed to kind of die out a little. I kind of wonder if maybe it was because it wasn't getting as much attention in the public as people thought it was going to, and as much as maybe they thought it was going to, but that's conjecture. The point is, it was really starting to bubble up to the surface for a while. If I remember correctly, it was like in the first half of 2019, and then it kind of faded away. But then we got this documentary, Extraordinary: The Revelations, which is a very good documentary, but the underlying thesis is pretty grim. The underlying thesis, from what I watched it one time, and I was somewhat distracted. A very good documentary that I recommend. I just was in a situation where I was a little distracted. I wasn't distracted because the quality wasn't good enough to fix my attention. But what I took from it primarily was that in their view, the aliens have been embedding people or embedding things, whatever, aliens, here to live among humanity, and they're preparing for the next phase in what is essentially a takeover. Right? So, yeah. And so, what happened in 2019, just before all this happened? The Hellier series hit. The Hellier series goes viral. The Hellier series, this is like kind of, to me, this is the center of the wheel of Hellier. Like, it all revolves around this book. If not for the simple fact that Terry Arist's identity was in this book. But to me, the whole series, among many things, seemed to be pointing people to read this book, right? I mean, that's part of my thought projection, my imagination roller coaster, the movie that I want everybody to imagine. And so, Hellier is released. Now, in the series, Alan Greenfield, who also, by the way, in another video recommended this book, and I'm going to be doing in-depth dive into this book, because this is a book, man. But anyway, so Alan Greenfield is in there. Alan Greenfield is on, like, if you look him up on Wikipedia, I think they call him a paranormal author, which he technically is, but he's so much more than that. I mean, the guy is he is a major fixture of the occult community and of the esoteric, strange research subculture, right? Alan Greenfield's kind of a big deal. He's an intellectual heavyweight. And so if you recall, when they interview Alan Greenfield, he suggests that he thinks that the entire Hellier series resulted from, I believe he called it the Secret Commonwealth, but it reminded me of like the Theosophists, who said that there was a small number of beings who were enlightened to the extent that they could alter and manipulate reality through their own means, but that they live among us, and that they are, for all intents and purposes, human, but they just have an understanding of reality and the techniques and technologies of reality that they're like bodhisattvas, in Buddhism, There's this idea that you have these beings that become enlightened beings but choose to remain with humanity in order to help lead them to enlightenment. And so Greenfield posits the idea that those are the forces that made the entire Hellier series happen, right? So let's assume that's true. Let's assume Greenfield is number one, telling the truth, which that is questionable, obviously, because I think anyone who watches that series still suspects that maybe Greenfield knew and was more of an orchestrator than he admits to being. And assumes that number one, he's telling the truth, and number two, that he's right. So for this fun experiment, let's assume that he's right, and that Hellier was guided by the secret commonwealth in order to bring knowledge to a wider audience, what they refer to as an initiation. But what if it was also to bring this book to more popular consciousness? And why? Why am I saying this? Because in the chapter preceding the interview with Terry Wrist, which is so essential to the Hellier series, in the chapter preceding that is a chapter titled How to Defeat the Euphonot Body Snatchers, Law of the Battle of Conquest. As a reminder, euphenots is a term that they basically use to talk about what we now usually just call aliens today. But it also represents a different view of it, which is that these alien beings don't come on nuts and bolts ships, and that they are like a different. They come from another dimension, basically, other dimensions that exist side by side with our dimensions. And those dimensions sometimes permeate each other. And these beings apparently have some way to willfully and intentionally come in between these levels of reality. That was something I always found really odd also, because they always talk about underground UFO space stations and stuff, which I always found really kind of ridiculous until I read this. And I can't wait to go into this book, because that book kind of is like an intellectual bridge between these ideas. But I'm getting off topic, and I apologize for that. I have a tendency to do that. So, what do we have? Hellier comes out in 2019, explodes people's minds, brings a whole lot of people to this book, which even if you look back when it was published, I believe it was published in 94, it was published in the 90s. Even back then, like when it was first published, even the like hardcore UFO weird researchers, even they said it was weird. Like even they were like, this book is weird even for me. It was that kind of reaction. Not that it was a bad book, but just that it was like, this is out there even for people who live on the fringe, which is funny to me. And so what happens though? This book has been floating around since the 90s. Hellier comes, blows up people's consciousness, drives people to the secret cipher, right? What's in the secret cipher? The playbook for how to defeat the euphenots. So this came into our consciousness at a time when this alien disclosure is happening, or whatever you want to call it, the psyop or the alien takeover. There seems to be some increase in our interactions with these aliens or the presentation of these aliens. And so let's, for this fun experiment, let's assume that there really is an imminent takeover, right? Aliens are about to take over. They're not our friends. They have bad intentions. Not only that, but they resemble the archons of the Gnostic Bible, meaning they are non-physical entities that feed off of negative human emotion. They feed off of our fear. They feed off of our hatred. They feed off of our anger. And let's assume that the events of 2020 were a launch into a new level of consciousness, and that all of the sped up discussions of aliens are the preface to an impending open battle with these things, right? And let's also assume that Alan Greenfield is correct, that Hellier was guided by the secret commonwealth. Was the secret commonwealth leading us to the guidebook on how to defeat the euphenots right at a time when the euphenots are preparing to make their big move? That's cool. And for those of you who maybe don't have the book, the chapter is very vague, but And I think he mentions it in a couple other parts in the book, but what it basically comes down to is that in terms of hard technology, these beings have us so outgunned that even trying to fight them is foolish, and we are doomed to fail. But because these creatures live off of human emotions and are composed of these like ethereal physical bodies that are very sensitive to emotions, the way to defeat them is actually through basically becoming spiritually enlightened, by which I mean he mentioned specifically in here, these aren't my words, this is me condensing and paraphrasing Greenfield's guidance, that if we can learn to raise our inner energy to be more positive, loving, fearless, and hopeful, then not only are we safe from these things that are trying to eat our negative emotions, but we actually are toxic to them, right? Just as they feed off our negativity and anger and hate, they are poisoned and destroyed by love, hope, positivity, etc. And so the way to defeat them is to master ourselves and master our inner being. And he mentions Buddha and Jesus in there as being two figures who figured this out. And were taken down by the archons, but kind of basically didn't care, because they still, like he says, like the Buddha went down laughing and Jesus refused to die at all, was something like that. It was basically like you can reach this point where you are so far beyond what these things can touch that not only are you safe from them, but you are dangerous to them. It's another premise in this book. Greenfield says that he doesn't believe that resistance is futile. He actually believes that these things are scared of us, of our potential, not of what we are, but of our potential. And so they try to hide us from our potential, because if not, then they can't use us as their feeding ground. And so I pose to you, true or not, and let's face it, it's almost certainly not true, but is that not a fun idea, right? The secret Commonwealth gets together, says we got to get this handbook for defeating euphenots into people's hands. How do we do it? We reach out to these Planet Weird folks. We contact them about Kentucky goblins. We set them on this course that initiates people into a higher understanding of reality, while also directing them to this book, in which they can find the guidebook, or the basic outline for how to defeat the euphenots. And we will have this happen just before the consciousness transformation of 2020, of the pandemic of 2020, of the alien disclosure of 2020, etc., etc. That's pretty cool to me. I'm fascinated by that. I like it. I'm going along for the ride. But and also I should say, for those who don't have the book, Greenfield doesn't go into detail or depth about these what I perceive as being essentially spiritual technologies. But I mean, of course, that makes sense, right? I mean, that requires whole books. You have, books on what you can do, the Ganesh mantra and the Jesus prayer and all these spiritual things that you can do, meditation, etc., etc. But he leads you in the direction, right? He's saying, like, seek these things out, find ways to master yourself, find ways to keep yourself positive, hopeful, and full of light and love. And that is how we form the army to not only resist, but destroy the euphenots and lead humanity into a new, brighter, and more beautiful reality. Pretty cool stuff. I think it's pretty fun imagination or thought experiment. And so I just thought I would discuss it. I hope you guys found it interesting too. I would sincerely love to hear comments, to read comments and to discuss this with people and hear some of your ideas about it. Or you could just say, well, this stuff is weird and I don't want to listen to this. That's cool too. It's all good to me. But I would pose this: no matter what, whether or not this is true or not, is it not inherently always a good thing to try to become more loving, hopeful, fearless? I think it is. That's how I'm choosing to approach this. Maybe it'll help me kick some euphonot ass, or maybe it will just make me a better person. And either way, that leads me to bettering the world, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the end pursuit of life. And so I'm rolling with it, man. I'm rolling with it. I'm rolling with the Greenfield guidebook. I'm doing it. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time. Sincerely.